Before her death 2 weeks ago, the translator, critic and script editor Barbara Bray could look back on a life in which she'd exerted a subtle but profound influence on the history of 20th century drama, an influence about which she let others make the claims. She translated Sartre, Marguerite Duras and Jean Genet. She was the lover and the editor of Samuel Beckett. She was ready to employ a young playwright called Harold Pinter when few thought that that was a sensible idea. In her role as a script editor in the BBC Radio Drama Department, she created an audience for complex and demanding plays, here on what used to be known as the Third programme. This afternoon, the former head of BBC Radio Drama, John Tidyman, came into the studio to share his memories of Barbara Bray, and I began by asking him what she brought to the world of radio drama.
She brought a great mind, and she brought a knowledge of what was going on, particularly in France. This was in the late 50s. She brought all those strange, absurd type plays to Radio 3. It was in the Third programme.
So Barbara Bray nurtured an audience for international drama.
Well, you see, an audience doesn't know what it wants until it gets it, and then it can say, I like it or I don't like it. She sort of wooed and weaned an audience, and she was terrific in picking talent, like Pinter, because Pinter's first play that was done in the theatre was absolutely, when it lasted 4 days in London. And Barbara then nurtured Harold, certainly. And most of his plays were done on radio, because they didn't do them anywhere else. And I think that Barbara had a huge effect on drama in this country, because these things were first done on the Third programme, Radio 3. And she was a brilliant translator from the French. I mean, she must be the only person that's ever won the Scott Moncrief Prize for translation from the French 4 times. And so she brought to the radio these plays, and that, in a way, became the spear point of all that followed. And the more mind-tickling area of drama, let us say.
So how did she end up in Paris with Samuel Beckett?
Well, I think it might have been the attraction of Beckett himself. They had a curious and very firm relationship. She probably knew Beckett better than anyone. He would write to her 2 or 3 times a day, even if he was seeing her in the evening.
And this was a professional as well as a personal relationship?
Well, it began professionally, and I think that it ended up as being something much closer.
So what was Beckett using her for, in effect? What contribution did she make to his work?
She encouraged him. Also, of course, she commissioned a lot of his works for radio. Particularly one remembers the amazing radio play And All That Fall, which was a remarkable work. And a lot of Beckett's plays were done on radio before they went to the theatre. So she was an encourager and an enabler and gave him confidence, I think.
What was she like to work with?
Very, very easy, but very, very demanding. She wouldn't let anything pass. She was very strict. Very disciplined. Great charm, an extremely beautiful woman, actually. And, she went to Paris and she lived there, the Rue Séguier. She set up this company in Paris called Dear Conjunction, which did plays in English and in French. She had heard on the radio, on Radio 3, a production of a play by an unknown person called Martin Crimp, who is now well known also as a French translator. And she asked me if I'd go and do this play for her in Paris for this company. And the actors were mostly bilingual. So one night they'd do the play in English, the next night they'd do it in French. And I can remember seeing also Faith Healer by Brian Friel that way. And she worked tenaciously with that company. She was quite remarkable in the encouraging of talent generally.
And she didn't lose this instinct even after Beckett's death?
She never lost her instinct, no. She rather like Margaret Ramsay, Peggy Ramsay, the famous agent, who Barbara worked with very closely, I think, because they had many writers in common. People like Ionesco and Adamov and Rob Grillet, as well as Marguerite Duras and Pinter and Beckett, that she encouraged. And, in fact, all the names of that time, and a lot of the English writers, too, John Mortimer, for instance, Bolt, were encouraged by her to write plays for radio. But I think that we are much more indebted to Barbara for the theatre that we have today than anyone realises. She's one of those kind of people whose name is not necessarily very well known, except amongst a few, but it deserves to be better known. Look at Waiting for Godot, now at the Haymarket, and sold out as a popular play. That says it all. Whoever would have thought that Beckett would become commercial, and Harold Pinter immensely commercial, and yet, if it hadn't been for Barbara, would Harold Pinter have been known? I mean, that's 2 people who won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
John Tiedemann on Barbara Bray, who died on the 25th of February.
I took advantage of being at the seaside to lay in a store of sucking stones. They were pebbles, but I call them stones. Yes, on this occasion, I laid in a considerable store. I distributed them equally between my 4 pockets and sucked them turn and turn about. This raised a problem, which I first solved in the following way. I had, say, 16 stones, 4 in each of my 4 pockets, these being the 2 pockets of my trousers and the 2 pockets of my greatcoat. Taking a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat and putting it in my mouth, I replaced it in the right pocket of my greatcoat by a stone from the right pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my greatcoat, which I replaced by the stone which was in my mouth as soon as I had finished sucking it. Thus there were still 4 stones in each of my 4 pockets, but not quite the same stones. And when the desire to suck took hold of me again, I drew again on the right pocket of my greatcoat, certain of not taking the same stone as the last time. And while I sucked it, I rearranged the other stones in the way I have just described, and so on. But this solution did not satisfy me fully, for it did not escape me that by an extraordinary hazard, the 4 stones circulating thus might always be the same 4, in which case, far from sucking the 16 stones turn and turn about, I was really only sucking 4, always the same turn and turn about. But I shuffled them well in my pocket before I began to suck, and again while I sucked before transferring them, in the hope of obtaining a more general circulation of the stones from pocket to pocket. But this was only a makeshift that could not long content a man like me, so I began to look for something else. And the first thing I hit upon was that I might do better to transfer the stones 4 by 4 instead of 1 by 1. That is to say, during the sucking, to take the 3 stones remaining in the right pocket of my greatcoat and replace them by the 4 in the right pocket of my trousers, and these by the 4 in the left pocket of my trousers, and these by the 4 in the left pocket of my greatcoat, and finally these by the 3 from the right pocket of my greatcoat, plus the 1, as soon as I had finished sucking it, which was in my mouth. Yes, it seemed to me at first that by so doing I would arrive at a better result. But on further reflection I had to change my mind and confess that the circulation of the stones 4 by 4 came to exactly the same thing as their circulation 1 by 1. For if I was certain of finding each time in the right pocket of my greatcoat 4 stones totally different from their immediate predecessors, the possibility nevertheless remained of my always chancing on the same stone within each group of 4, and consequently of my sucking not the 16 turn and turn about as I wished, but in fact 4 only, always the same turn and turn about. So I had to seek elsewhere than in the mode of circulation. For no matter how I caused the stones to circulate, I always ran the same risk. It was obvious that by increasing the number of my pockets, I was bound to increase my chances of enjoying my stones in the way I planned. That is to say, one after the other, until their number was exhausted. Had I had 8 pockets, for example, instead of the 4 I did have, then even the most diabolical hazard could not have prevented me from sucking at least 8 of my 16 stones, turn and turn about. The truth is, I should have needed 16 pockets in order to be quite easy in my mind. And for a long time I could see no other conclusion than this, that short of having 16 pockets, each with its stone, I could never reach the goal I had set myself short of an extraordinary hazard. And if at a pinch I could double the number of my pockets, were it only by dividing each pocket into 2 with the help of a few safety pins, let us say, to quadruple them seemed to be more than I could manage, and I did not feel inclined to take all that trouble for a half measure, for I was beginning to lose all sense of measure after all this wrestling and wrangling, and to say all or nothing. And if I was tempted an instant to establish a more equitable proportion between my stones and my pockets by reducing the former to the number of the latter, it was only for an instant, for it would have been an admission of defeat. And sitting on the shore before the sea, the 16 stones spread out before my eyes, I gazed at them in anger and perplexity. And while I gazed thus at my stones, revolving interminable martingales, all equally defective, and crushing handfuls of sand, so that the sand ran through my fingers and fell back upon the strand, Yes, while thus I lulled my mind and part of my body, one day it suddenly dawned on the former, dimly, that I might perhaps achieve my purpose without increasing the number of my pockets or reducing the number of my stones, but simply by sacrificing the principle of trim. The meaning of this illumination, which suddenly began to sing within me like a verse of Isaiah or of Jeremiah, I did not penetrate at once, and notably the word trim, which I had never met with in this sense. It long remained obscure. Finally I seemed to grasp that this word trim could not here mean anything else, anything better, than the distribution of the 16 stones in 4 groups of 4, one group in each pocket, and that it was my refusal to consider any distribution other than this that had vitiated my calculation till then and rendered the problem literally insoluble. And it was on the basis of this interpretation, whether right or wrong, that I finally reached a solution, inelegant assuredly, but sound. Now I am willing to believe, indeed I firmly believe, that other solutions to this problem might have been found, and indeed may still be found, no less sound, but much more elegant than the one I shall now describe, if I can. And I believe too that had I been a little more insistent, a little more resistant, I could have found them myself. But I was tired, and I contented myself ingloriously with the first solution that was a solution to this problem. But not to go over the heartbreaking stages through which I passed before I came to it, here it is in all its hideousness. All that was necessary was to put, for example, to begin with, 6 stones in the right pocket of my greatcoat, or supply pocket, 5 in the right pocket of my trousers, and 5 in the left pocket of my trousers. That makes the lot, twice 5, 10, plus 6, 16, and none, for none remained, in the left pocket of my greatcoat, which for the time being remained empty of stones, that is, for its usual contents remained, as well as occasional objects. For where do you think I hid my vegetable knife, my silver, my horn, and the other things that I have not yet named, perhaps never shall name? Good. Now I can begin to suck. Watch me closely. I take a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat, suck it, stop sucking it, put it in the left pocket of my greatcoat, the one empty of stones. I take a second stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat, suck it, put it in the left pocket of my greatcoat, suck it, and so on, until the right pocket of my greatcoat is empty, apart from its usual and casual contents, and the 6 stones I have just sucked, one after the other, are all in the left pocket of my greatcoat. Pausing then and concentrating so as not to make a balls of it, I transfer to the right pocket of my greatcoat, in which there are no stones left, the 5 stones in the right pocket of my trousers, which are replaced by the 5 stones in the left pocket of my trousers, which are replaced by the 6 stones in the left pocket of my greatcoat. At this stage, then, the left pocket of my greatcoat is again empty of stones, while the right pocket of my greatcoat is again supplied, and in the right way, that is to say, with other stones than those I have just sucked. These other stones I then begin to suck, one after the other, and transfer as I go along to the left pocket of my greatcoat, being absolutely certain, as far as one can be in an affair of this kind, that I am not sucking the same stones as a moment before, but others. And when the right pocket of my greatcoat is again empty of stones, and the 5 I have just sucked are all without exception in the left pocket of my greatcoat, then I proceed to the same redistribution as a moment before, or a similar redistribution. That is to say, I transfer to the right pocket of my greatcoat, now again available, the 5 stones in the right pocket of my trousers, which are replaced by the 6 stones in the left pocket of my trousers, which are replaced by the 5 stones in the left pocket of my greatcoat. And there I am, ready to begin again. Do I have to go on? No, for it is clear that after the next series of sucks and transfers, I shall be back where I started. That is to say, with the first 6 stones back in the supply pocket, the next 5 in the right pocket of my sticky old trousers, and finally the last 5 in left pocket of the same, and my 16 stones would have been sucked once at least in impeccable succession. Not one sucked twice, not one left unsucked. It is true that the next time I could scarcely hope to suck my stones in the same order as the first time, and that the 1st, 7th and 12th example of the first cycle might very well be the 6th, 7th and 11th and 16th respectively of the second, if the worst came to the